Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here at JacksonWild in conversation with Christian Cooper. My name is Sanjan. I'm the CEO of Conservation International, and really great pleasure to welcome Christian Cooper to this conversation. Christian Cooper, first and foremost, is a fellow birder. He's a writer, an editor, and a board member of the New York City Audubon. After graduating from Harvard, Christian started working in comics, specifically writing and editing for Marvel for many years. And then his latest work, which is just out, is basically a Black Lives Matter themed comic. It's called It's a Bird and was just published by DC Comics. Christian, so great to have you here. You're in New York. You're on your rooftop garden, I believe. I'm outside on my deck here in Virginia. Maybe we'll have a bird or two fly by here.
Hopefully. Hi, Sanjay.
Hopefully.
It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you guys.
Great. So look, let's get this thing out of the way. Anyone who Googles your name, unfortunately or fortunately, will run into what you call the incident. That's in quotation marks, the incident. So how you basically go from an accomplished guy, a birder, someone who's involved in education, someone who's involved in storytelling, and someone who's deeply passionate about birding, into this public persona, this public figure, famous in unusual and maybe painful way. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm good. It's been an interesting summer. But my life was in need of some shaking up, so I am just going with it and trying to manage it as best I can, and keep my head screwed on straight if I can, and not let any of the craziness get to me. I've got good family members and friends who act as a break on all the craziness and help keep me sort of level-headed.
Because this was not something you were thinking in the moment, wow, this is going to really just get out there. You were just doing what you do all the time.
Yeah, it was not what I expected to have happen on Memorial Day, and it just kind of took a turn. And so, I guess that's what happens sometimes in life. Things take a turn, and you gotta figure out how to navigate it.
Now, very close to where I live here is a really beautiful place called Huntley Meadow. I go birding there quite frequently, sometimes with my very young daughter and my wife. I noticed, I think in late May, signs popping up on my path that talked about Black Birding Week. And frankly, I'd never heard about Black Birding Week, so I went and kind of looked it up. And I realized that it was in part inspired by you.
Yeah, because of the incident, it caused a bunch of other Black birders to put their heads together and say, hey, you know what? This is an opportunity to reach out to each other, but also to the broader world, to say that, engaging with the outdoors, being specifically birding outdoors, is not an activity that is restricted to old white people, which seems to be the stereotype. There's a whole bunch of us now, a growing numbers of us, Black birders. Hasn't always been the case. I know for example, I've been birding Central Park for 35 years, and I've been birding in general, even long before that. I've been birding since I was about 10 years old. I'm a little older than that now. But in all that time, there were not a lot of Black birders in the world, but the number has been increasing steadily. I see it in Central Park, and I hear about it in other places. So go us.
And you got into it because of your dad and because of family road trips that you guys used to make.
Sure. My dad was a biology teacher and general science teacher, so nature was always very big in our household. And he always took us camping, which was fantastic because it really gave me an appreciation for the natural world. So we would go camping in Maine. We took a camping trip down to Florida and passed through all the coastal southern states on the way. And then the big trip was a cross-country camping trip. Since both my parents were teachers, they both had the summers off. So one summer they packed me, my sister, themselves, and the family Cocker Spaniel into a Volkswagen Westphalia camper, you know, those van-sized things. And we spent the entire summer going west across Canada, down the west coast, and then back through the continental U.S. And stopping in all sorts of places along the way. I was very young when that happened. I guess I must have been about, I'm guessing I was about 8 or 9. So I have memories of it, but at this point, you know, they're foggy memories. So there are a lot of places I want to visit again and see anew with adult eyes. But it was an incredible grounding in the wild, in the outdoors. And that stuck with me. And then the birding component came because first, my parents, for some reason, decided I needed to be in a woodworking shop one summer. God knows why. So I had the choice of building a footstool or a bird feeder. So I picked the bird feeder, and when it was built, I put it up in the backyard and filled it up with some seed. And all of a sudden, I saw these crows with red patches in the shoulder of the wing coming to the feeder, and I got all excited because I had discovered a new species of crow. And then, of course, later found out they were red-winged blackbirds. So that,
So,
but that kind of sparked the interest.
so Chris, so that obviously brings up a question I think about all the time, is that why don't we see more people of color, involved in conservation, involved in birding, involved in natural history? Or are they out there and we are just not tuned to see them? I mean, what's the barrier here? Do you see it getting better? Or are you still kind of a bit depressed that as a 10-year-old, you're probably a pretty rare bird to begin with? And now as an adult, and I feel the same way, I feel very lonely sometimes when I'm out in nature.
It's definitely gotten better, but when, as I used to joke, there are 5 of us black male birders in the continental United States, and then it goes up to 10, well, that's a 100% increase. So it looks really good, but there's still not that many. So it's gotten better, it's getting better, but it's not where we should be yet, considering the demographics of the country are changing. And in some parts of the country have changed, and in some parts of the country have always been, predominantly or in a major way, black and brown. So that being the case, we should be out there more. And why aren't we? What are the barriers? I think one of the big barriers is economics. I think, if you're concerned, black and brown people for various reasons are disproportionately, lower on the economic rungs because of redlining, because of history, because of a lot of institutional barriers to economic progress for us. And, plenty of us overcome it, but there's still that holding a lot of people back. So as a result of that, I think if you're worrying about, where the rent's going to come from, if you're worrying about, how you're going to put food on the table, you have less brain space to be thinking about, hey, let's go out and take a nice vacation out in nature. Similarly, if you're concentrated because of economic necessity in an urban space, then it's going to be harder for you to turn your attention to the natural world. Now, not impossible. Our urban spaces are not isolated from nature. I will tell you that as part of New York City Audubon. I'm in the biggest city in the country, and there's tons of nature here, tons of nature in New York City. I'm here up on my roof deck, and I routinely see kestrels, red-tailed hawks, mockingbirds, American robins, and then the migrants are a whole nother question.
I mean, it's a city of islands, right?
It's a city of islands, exactly, and on lots of shoreline, coastline, nesting herons, lots of stuff, which is what New York City Audubon deals with a lot, and getting people out there to appreciate it and see it. So, but it's not a no-brainer to go from an urban environment to thinking about nature. And since so many of us, for various historical reasons and economic reasons, are concentrated in urban areas, I don't know if you can hear the common crow above me, but that's a nice little touch. You can probably also hear the siren. Again, urban, nature, together. But I think because of that, nature is not a no-brainer for us. So
Yeah.
And when you think about it,
Let
a
me
lot of people who live in the city, sorry, I just want to finish this
please,
point.
please.
A lot of people who live in the city, a lot of people who do have the economic advantages, they have weekend places up in the country. They have summer homes. They send their kids to summer camps where even though they're living in the city, they get exposed to nature and develop a love for it. And that doesn't happen for a lot of black and brown kids.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder also if you think that, I mean, I completely agree with you, but I also wonder whether it's also sort of the role models aren't there. And because the role models aren't there, the parents don't see this as a pathway, right? So for me, I think you have a similar story. You know, I fooled my family into thinking I was pre-med. And eventually, when I got a PhD in biology and I go back to Sri Lanka, my grandmother, I overhear telling a neighbor, a friend, my grandson is back. He's a doctor now, but not the kind who saves people. Right. So this is sort of like this huge pressure to get into certain tracks, because when I was a kid, and even to some extent now, but certainly when I was a kid, you absolutely could not see your heroes on film or on TV or in books who looked like you. David
Sure.
Attenborough, who I grew up in, did not look like me.
Sure. And it's funny because I guess, God, it must be about almost 30 years ago or 20 years ago now. At one point, one of the Marvel comics, when I was working there, decided to put in a birder. And, probably just because, and in fact, I know just because they knew me and they knew I was a birder. But when they put the birder in the comic, the birder they put in was portrayed as an elderly white man. And I'm like, so the stereotypes persist, and I think you're absolutely right. Not having role models makes people not envision it as something they can do. Birding is something that white people do. Being out in nature is something that white people do. No, that's what we've got to communicate, is that nature, the wild, the birds, they don't belong to anybody, but they are for everybody to enjoy. And if we don't really start communicating that idea, we're going to be in deep, deep trouble as a movement.
So let me ask you on that, right? Because I am going to move away from birds and get into like storytelling. But one more sort of question to follow up on that. You spent your life watching birds and studying them, and I'm sure dreaming them. What can birds tell us about human society?
Oh gosh, lots. I mean, as a barometer of the state of the environment, as a metaphor for our lives, as inspiration. I mean, I think one of the reasons why birds captivate us so much is because they can fly. I mean, that absolute freedom is something we all aspire to, the ability to launch ourselves into the sky. Think about the perspective they have from up there, and think about the different way they must think, because they're not land bound. They don't think just backwards, forward, left, right. They think backwards, forward, left, right, up, down, a whole new dimension to thought for them. So, I think in all those ways, birds capture our imagination. But then, think about what they say metaphorically when you think about something like um, the house
House
finch.
finch.
The house finch. Carpoticus mexicanus is its scientific name. It is a bird of the desert Southwest. It recognizes no borders. You can put up all the walls you want. The bird is still going to go where the bird is going to go, where it can find the necessities it needs to raise its young successfully. Gee, does that sound like any situation we may be facing? And the fact that the house finch is spread all over the continental United States. It was introduced in other areas, and it has succeeded here and thrived here. And we get to enjoy them. These beautiful birds with the great red heads and the beautiful song that cascades along. That's a wonderful thing. I mean, I don't want to paint invasive species is always a wonderful thing, but in the case of the house finch, we kind of like it.
Wonderful. So let's move on to, obviously we're in a film festival and a wildlife environment conservation film festival, one of the best in the world. But you told me something when I had a chance to catch up with you a couple of weeks ago. You don't actually watch a lot of wildlife or environmental shows. I do have a couple of recommendations from this year's crop for you, but I'm curious, why is that? Or even better, let me ask you, what could a producer, a host, a media company do to win you over as an audience member?
Well, there's one hurdle they can't overcome, which is I like to actually be out there doing it. So you can't duplicate that with film.
Well, we could cast you in something. But I
But
promise you that's not doing. That's just repeating the same thing many times over while they get the camera ready. But keep going, sorry.
well, no, but I think the other thing, the reason why I shy not just away from it's not just nature documentaries, but documentaries in general. I mean, I will watch them, but reality shows almost zero interest. And the reason is because I am drawn to stories. I am drawn to storytelling. I think it's the oldest form of communication that we as human beings have. Back when we were on the savannas of Africa as a species, having just emerged, we sat around the campfire and we told each other stories. And that ability to craft a story with a beginning, middle, and end that has a message embedded in it that you learn not through being beat over the head with it, but because it's embedded in the characters and what they go through. I find that very compelling. That reaches me on a very deep level. It's one of the reasons why I, decided to work at Marvel Comics. Is because I consider, Marvel the last bastion, or superhero comics in general, as the last bastion of myth making in Western society. And I'm very interested in that kind of storytelling. So I think if as conservation filmmakers, if you can make sure that you shape things into a story, and I'm sure I know you guys do, but the more you can do that, the more you're going to be able to lure in people like me.
And what about the story versus who is telling the story? What kind of role do you think that plays? I mean, I go back to my, as a child growing up and watching Gerald Durrell or watching David Attenborough, or even today, quite, I mean, I think quite sadly, if you turn on the television and you look at wildlife shows, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've probably been in 10 documentaries, like some of the, sort of big series and stuff like that. And I have to, I'm really trying hard to think whether there has been a single person of color, either in front of the camera or behind the camera on any of my shoots as a, except for like local guides, right? Or a local expert you pick up, which is quite staggering, if you think about that. What do you
Well,
think about storyteller versus the story itself?
I mean, I think it goes back to what we were saying before about the lack of role models. You see that same lack of role models in real life as or in film and video as you see in real life. Now there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing there, or a self-perpetuating cycle. Nobody sees themselves, so nobody gets interested. Nobody's interested, so the pool of people who are going to be available for the films and the videos is largely going to be drawn from the same group of white people who have been doing this, since the dawn of time. So that's, I think you're right. Yeah, not seeing oneself in these films diminishes the interest. I mean, a great example is the black response when, not in conservation film, but a great example of film catching up and saying, oh yeah, maybe if we show these folks, there'll be some interest. When Marvel did the Black Panther movie, and oh my God, you couldn't keep people from going. Black people went in droves, but not just black people. White folks, Asian folks, everybody was like, oh, this is new. This is something we haven't seen before, and they scarfed it up. So yeah, I think that is definitely the hosting angle is definitely an angle that can be exploited in film and video to bring a new dimension and bring in new audiences.
Let me ask you about conservation or environmentalism at large, because you clearly care about it. You spend time educating people about it, and you're on the board of one of the most powerful Audubon groups around, the New York City Audubon Society. How do we fit in? I've often wrestled with this question of fit, and I guess you have you sort of make this illustration about your glasses, and how when you have your glasses on, you're perceived in one way, and then when you take your glasses off, you're sometimes perceived in a completely different way. When I saw the photo of you in the I think it was in the New York Times, the first thing that went through my mind is the Swarovski ELs that you were carrying around your neck, which is the same pair of binoculars I have, right? So there's these codes, these little symbols that we take, some small, some big, that allows us to say this person fits in conservation. For me, it was seeing you with those pair of binoculars, right? Like, I'll be honest with this. And it's something we struggle with as well, because when I look at people who I want to be part of my organization, there's a bias toward people who bird or who fly fish or who wear khaki or who go on safari or who, look or fit in a certain way. Even though those things are actually quite easy to change. I mean, you could change those glasses in a heartbeat, and I could teach you to fly fish in a day, and you could probably take someone out naively and bird right then and there. Do we think we overemphasize these symbols that make us select folks to be in conservation and exclude others? How does that hurt us? How do we change that?
I don't know. I am less attuned to that aspect of things. I think probably because I have the same bias as you have. I see the binoculars, and in fact, I do it in Central Park all the time. I will see people walking through the park. I'm like, ignore, ignore, ignore binoculars. Hello, ignore, ignore binoculars. Hello. So it's not the I don't care what brand. In fact, before my dad gave me my Swarovskis as a 50th birthday gift, I was walking around with this battered old black ancient pair of binoculars that everyone, because in Central Park, there's a lot of rich people birding in Central Park, and the Swarovskis are a status symbol, and they're all looking at me like sideways, like, how do you see anything in that thing? And I'm like, I've seen more birds than you do, so they work. But no, I don't necessarily have a good answer for that, because I have a similar bias as you do. I look for those signposts, not of race or gender or ethnicity, but of binoculars, of the things that we associate with being outdoors and being in nature and appreciating it. And that's something I think I probably have to overcome, just like you were talking about.
Tell me about this new comic that you've got out. It's a bird. I haven't seen it yet. I've looked at a couple of sort of screenshots of it. I think I can guess what inspired you, but tell me about what inspired you and this sort of dual coupling that you have of birds and folks who, unfortunately, in some ways, have become icons now. Meaning, unfortunately, because they paid for it with their lives in some instances, certainly.
Yes. So the DC Comics came to me. Two old friends of mine. We've been friends since we were all working together in Marvel, and have stayed friends through the years. And I haven't done a comic in 20 years. And they came to me and they said, "Oh, why don't you do a comic about your experiences?" And I'm like, "About the incident? I don't know. Capes and Superman. I'm not sure how that fits in with the incident." So I was thinking about it, and then they called me back and they said, "Well, we have a title." And I'm like, "Okay, we haven't figured anything out, but give me the title." And they said, "It's a bird." And I thought about it for a second. I'm like, "Oh, look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's plane, it's Superman." And as soon as they gave me the title, the idea for the story just kind of all fell into place, of taking various experiences of mine. Obviously, at least part of the story is inspired by the incident. But, beyond that, there's a whole bunch of my experiences that get drawn into it, and a bunch of experiences of other birders of color. And the experiences we're going through this summer and before with the people who have been killed unjustly by police. And I just tried to weave all those experiences together into a single narrative through this one mystical conceit, which is a magic pair of binoculars, a pair of binoculars that has a little something extra about them. And what happens when this naive young kid gets these binoculars and goes out birding. So that was the inspiration. That's what made the story come into being. Yeah. And I hopefully it communicates a whole bunch of messages, but principally the idea that there's a racial bias that runs deep through our country, and it can cause not only the minor, relatively minor harms that we as people of color experience when we try to go out into the wild and into public spaces, because we do face these things of being suspect, of being considered, oh, well, that person's up to no good because they can't possibly actually be here for nature. Um, to the much greater harms of actually losing your life at the hands of the police. And the thing that both of those things have in common is that underlying long-standing racial bias that runs through our country like a poison that's seeped into the ground and keeps bubbling up, and we can't seem to get rid of it. And it's everywhere. It's here in New York. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, I'm really surprised that happened to you in New York City." I'm like, "Really? Were you not paying attention when Eric Garner got choked to death? Were you not paying attention when Amadou Diallo got shot dead in a hail of 41 bullets for holding his wallet on his own doorstep?" Um, so it runs through our whole country. It goes back centuries, and we've got to start to fix it. And black people can't fix it. White people have to fix it.
I think the hardest thing about, well, I shouldn't say it's the hardest thing, but I think certainly one thing that affects me is that this pervasiveness of racism, prejudice, makes makes me suspicious of even someone's misintentions. I don't give people a benefit of the doubt. If someone approaches me in the forest, if someone's following me, if so, it's a really weird thing, man. Like little slights are really major blows, and they might be unintentional. And I must imagine that's the same in some ways for you. That sort of every time you're out there, someone's behind you, and you're thinking, what are they thinking about me being out here? And it gets exhaustive.
It does. I guess the armor I put on is the same armor I put on as a gay man, which is that I'm here and you're just gonna have to deal with it. And I try to take that attitude, when I'm out there. I'm like, yeah, this is it. Yeah, I'm here. I'm doing what I'm doing, and that's on. If you have some other problem with that, that's on you. That's not on me. Same thing, the same thing with the gay thing. I'm here. Yeah, I'm gay. If that's a problem for you, that's your problem. It's not mine. The issue becomes when they try to make it your problem, when they try to somehow interfere with you, make your life miserable. And then you got like what happened in the incident.
Yeah.
And then you've got to figure out how to navigate that. But I think you and I both know you deal with that so much in your life as a black or brown person that you kind of, to an extent, it just rolls off you. You try not to let it get to you. It does sometimes. It depends on what's happened. It depends on how bad your day has been. Depends on how much of it you've been dealing with lately. Depends on if you're stressed out about, COVID and everything else, so that your defenses are lowered. But, with any luck, because otherwise we wouldn't make it through the world, because this stuff happens all the time in big ways and little ways. So
Chris, I must say, I mean, that armor that you have is pretty inspiring right there. Because I mean, honestly, like my experience is pale in comparison to honestly even some of your experiences, and then obviously the experiences of so many other people. I was lucky, like you, to have wonderful parents. I was lucky to escape some of the things that could have trapped me in certain places, and it just gets tiring after a while. That's, for me, it's just a wariness that you have to kind of justify, or you have to always ask yourself, am I up here because I'm brown, as opposed to the fact that, I've spent my whole life working on this. And I think that justification is hard to make. And certainly when you're on television, when you're on film, you feel it because you're constantly asking, how's the audience reacting to me? And is the reaction based on my race as opposed to what I'm actually delivering?
Well, and as much as I like to say, I put on my armor, there's also adjustments you make. J. Drew Lanham, a very famous scientist, conservationist, has talked about birding while black and some of the implications of that. And there are things we do to try to protect ourselves. For example, there are parts of this country which, despite having fabulous birds, I won't go birding there. I don't care what rare bird shows up in a particular place. If that place is a place where I will find Confederate flags waving and Confederate bumper stickers on the back of pickup trucks with gun racks, I'm not going after that rarity. I'm just not going there, which is a terrible thing to have to say, but it is, the unfortunate truth. I mean, I avoid going to Florida because of what happened to Trayvon Martin, and until that state repeals its stand your ground law, I'm avoiding Florida like the plague. I even stopped buying orange juice because I'm just not doing it. Um, so these are some of the realities we deal with. But again, it's nothing new for us. We've had to deal with this all the time.
So just want to close out by asking you a few questions, very light, and I just want a fast, quick reaction answer from you. So, 10-second answer.
Okay.
Favorite comic book character?
Storm of the X-Men.
Why?
Oh, God, because she's awesome. I mean, one time the supervillain Magneto captured all the X-Men and they were reduced to the physical abilities of infants, even though they had their adult minds. But Storm was able to control her body and pick the lock that had them all imprisoned with her teeth and free the rest of her fellow X-Men. Plus, she controls the weather, and she's basically an Earth goddess personified. So yeah, I'm all about Storm.
Fantastic. Okay.
And she's African American. Or no, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. She's African and American. Her dad's American. Her mother's African. She was born in Africa, so she's African.
Brilliant. Favorite recent TV show?
Gosh, recent TV show.
Well, I know you're a big Game of Thrones fan, but let's leave Game of Thrones because that's
okay.
a whole different.
You should have warned me you were going to ask me this. I'm trying to think of what I've been watching that I've been sort of scarfing up. Let's come back to that.
All right. Good book you're reading, or a good book that you'd like us to read.
The thing I was reading was the Mahabharata.
Damn.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, exactly.
I mean, Mahabharata is like the biggest poem in the world. I mean, that's the song of gods, right?
Okay, so I wasn't reading in the original.
In the original Sanskrit, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And B, I didn't get all the way through it, though I was trying mightily. But this goes back to my love of myth, and so I wanted to really immerse myself in the Indian mythological epic that really is really central in Indian culture.
I'm good with that. All right, one place you would want to go birding.
Would want to go birding? One place?
Yeah, one place that you haven't been that you are like, okay, bucket trip, that's what I want to go see. I know you spent a couple of weeks in Kenya and kind of went a little bored because you were looking at big animals that weren't doing anything. So I'm looking for that bird destination that you want to go to.
I will give you the three that are at the top of my list because there is no one. Cuba, Madagascar, and Bhutan.
Nice. All right, I'll take you to Madagascar. That's an easy one. Okay, now this is
just
kind of
one. That's a hard one.
Well, we're connected there, so we're good there.
Yes.
Favorite bird? Now, it can be either a species or it could be just sort of the family.
Okay.
Like, I love owls.
As everyone in Central Park will tell you, my favorite warbler, because everybody has a favorite warbler here in the East. We've got a pageant of warblers, is the Blackburnian warbler. It is smaller than a sparrow, as most warblers are, kind of gray and white and black, but the throat is day-glow fiery orange when you get a good male, incandescent, and it is one of the most spectacular things you'll ever see.
So, Chris, I'm going to open this up to questions, and I know there's lots and lots of questions from the audience. But one question that's been submitted that I'd like to kick it off with is simply this. You have the opportunity right now to speak to 1,000+ storytellers and filmmakers, some of the best in the world. You turn on a conservation or wildlife show, and chances are that person is in this audience. What would you like to say to them?
I think the most important thing is make sure your stories are reaching quote unquote minority audiences, BIPOC, black, brown people. Make sure your stories are reaching them. And the reason why that's so important is because the demographics of our nation have changed, are changing, and have changed. And if we don't find a way to engage black and brown folks with conservation, with nature, then there will be no constituency to protect it. And then we won't be able to get legislation through that we desperately need to keep our green spaces and our wild spaces. So you really find a way, whether that's bringing in folks who will be representative of black and brown people on screen, address our issues, find a way to reach our audiences, because if you don't, we're going to be in trouble.
Chris, listen, thank you so much. I mean, you are such a great storyteller. And what I love about you is the minute you start talking, you just come alive and you just project through the camera. It feels like we're here together on a deck. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for inspiring a whole generation of birders. Black, white, brown, it doesn't really matter. Just get out there and bird. And
Absolutely.
Thank you for being a great storyteller.
Oh, Sanjan, thank you for interviewing me and having me and asking me great questions.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.